for truth.
Welcome to Duality Check, the podcast where two brothers embark on a journey through the realms of scientific inquiry, the mysteries of the past, and the uncharted realms of spirituality. Join us as we explore the wonders of our world and beyond, all while embracing the roles of curious bystanders rather than experts. Together, we'll unravel the tapestry of existence, blending the dichotomies of knowledge and wonder. Get ready to question, ponder, and delve into the dualities that shape our understanding of reality on Duality Check.
Check.
I'm Drew.
And I'm Dean.
It's the third brother Glover here, John.
We've made reference.
You still messed up.
I know.
He was going to change the intro to say we're three brothers, but he still said two after the second try.
I was flowing on the second one, and then I messed up, and I was like, we could start over and do it again, but...
Nah, it's all right.
It's solid.
Welcome to the podcast where three brothers embark on a journey through the realms of scientific inquiry.
We don't have a microphone for John, so you'll just have to grab my mic if you want to say something.
Yeah.
Okay,
or just lean in, either way.
Yeah.
I'm just here on the sidelines, to be honest. I have no idea what you guys are going to talk about, so I'm just proud of these boys. Just want to be along for the ride and watch the process.
Welcome.
Also, John was one of the contributors to that opening music.
Yes, that's right.
John and I used to have a studio together, and we made that song as part of a commercial, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Was that the commercial you guys did for Propellerhead?
That was the commercial we did for, well, they're no longer called Propellerhead. They're Reason Studios now.
Yeah, sorry, my bad.
But, yeah.
I didn't even know they made that change.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was Stevie Nader's song. I just did keys on it and then helped arrange it, right? Because we sampled one of his pre-existing songs.
Yeah, so we have a friend, Stevie Nader, who's a singer-songwriter. He plays guitar. And we sampled his song.
Yeah, he's a great singer.
Actually, we had him come into the studio and re-record it, and we sampled that.
Right.
So you had already heard it, and it was a different
I had a recording of the song, and we started this song by sampling his original, but then we asked him if he'd be down to come in.
Re-record it.
He came in.
Interesting.
So.
Oh, cool.
That was a really fun project. It turned out great.
Yeah, that was fun.
It's been helpful in our podcast, so that's a cool little backstory.
Yeah. I think it's amazing too, and you guys probably already touched on this. I know on all your episodes you talk about how like the songs relate to the subject matter.
Yeah.
And like that song mistook life for truth.
Yeah.
I think that's really, it speaks to the title of
I always
your
thought he was
podcast.
saying lie. I mistook a lie.
Mistook lie for truth.
Is that what he says?
He might actually say that.
I think he says both, to be honest.
Life,
he might say both.
Wow. I don't actually know.
When you guys first came out with it and I was hearing it, I used to say life too.
Yeah.
But and then when I heard it more and more when we were doing the podcast, I started to realize it was lie, which specifically for what we're talking about in the podcast, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
But if you think about it, like how those lyrics go, like lie for, right?
Yeah.
Lie for. I mistook life for.
Yeah.
Right? So like that
Easy
F ends up attaching to the end of lie, which makes it sound like life.
Right.
It's easy to
It ends up being
misinterpret
ambiguous for the listener, but either way, I guess it speaks to the podcast, right? Lie for truth
right.
or life for truth.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yeah. Either way. But it's funny we brought that up because I had the same thing happen before the podcast, and then when I was hearing it over and over again as we were trying to pick a intro song, I was like, "Oh, it says lie." Like I've been saying it this whole time wrong. But either way, it makes sense.
Him. I'm gonna text him.
Yeah, you should ask him. That's a good question.
Either way,
because if he's really mistaking life for truth, so he's saying life is a lie,
right?
Which also is a very duality check topic. Where's that buzz coming from?
I'm hearing it too.
Yeah, it's
Let's try to figure this out live.
Well, hopefully you guys can't hear that buzz.
it
might just be. It could be the headphones.
That wouldn't make... You think it's getting crossed because it's...
You're hearing the buzz too?
I'm hearing it though too, yeah.
Well, let's move on and deal with it. And we'll check during the break if all of you can hear it and try and fix it then, if it's there for you guys.
So just right off the bat, we'll let everybody know we want some engagement, all right? So everybody like, subscribe, comment. We'll do it in the front just so people hear it, you know. There's a lot of people who fall off a little, you know, skip around, and we know how YouTube goes and all the other stuff. So like, subscribe, comment. You can hit us up at host@dualitycheck.net. It's our website as well. You can check that out. It's got every link. Oh, there it was.
Maybe my computer was too close to the interface.
It seems like every time we talk.
Well, yeah. I've got a gate put on the track, so when we stop talking and the audio goes low, it just mutes it completely. That's why you can't hear it unless we talk.
Okay. Yeah, host@dualitycheck.net. It's our website. Go check it out. Dean put a lot of work into that. It looks great.
That's our email. Our website is dualitycheck.net.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. Yeah. Host@dualitycheck is our email. Yeah. Dualitycheck.net is our website. Yeah.
So this is episode 29. We're doing part 3 of the Cosmic Summit. So we've listened to some more talks to go over with you guys. It went away when you came back. Anyway, so before that, you said you got some stuff for us?
So we've got a couple of comments on YouTube from Greg2846. He says, "Hello guys, I stumbled across your podcast while looking for more information on Chris Bledsoe. It's a great episode, so provisionally I'll give you a sub, and I'm going to listen to part 2. I'll try to get the book as well." The one we read, his book.
Yeah.
UFO of God. You were also asking for some catchphrase for your podcast after seeing Bledsoe Said So.
Yes.
And he came up with one that says, "Uncover the Glover."
Yo.
Or uncover
How about that?
with Glover? Or he says uncover the Glover.
He says uncover with Glover. Yeah.
Uncover with Glover is pretty cool.
What's this dude's name?
It could also be Discover with Glover.
Discover with Glover would be a good one. Ooh. So he also watched part 2 and then commented again.
Oh, did he? Cool.
Yeah.
I only saw that first comment.
I responded to him by just telling him how awesome the Uncover with Glover is. I say the Glover, but
we should probably be responding back to these people, letting them know that we're responding to their messages on the podcast too.
I'll respond to his next one, this one. "Thanks for part 2 of Bledsoe's story. I'm highly suspicious, though, of the lady's true intentions. She'd take your Crohn's away, but generously give you arthritis? No thanks.
Interesting.
Maybe it's the same entity who showed up at Fatima. Also, quite a dodgy one. She, in turn, predicted that 2 children would die, which happened, but wrongly predicted the end of the First World War."
Where does that come from, I wonder? So, yeah, if you're listening to this, what other info do you have about the lady? What are the other sources? Because I don't recall that.
Unless that...
I mean, obviously, Chris Bledsoe comes way after World War II, so maybe there's some sort of accounts or channeling or something that mentions her from before the World Wars.
Well, he also referenced the entity who showed up at Fatima, so he might be referencing that.
The Lady of Fatima.
He might be referencing that, and if it's the same entity, then he's connecting the two.
Interesting. Okay. Huh.
But yeah, the idea that she would take your Crohn's away but generously gives you arthritis is a good point.
Did his arthritis act up right away? I don't recall that. I thought...
No, it happened later.
It was like a process. Like it started...
So it
slowly started coming
as
on.
he was having the experiences where he was like consciously being taken out of his body and gone with them on these journeys. That's when the arthritis started. After she had already cured the Crohn's disease.
Right.
Because that's when he said, he alludes, or his son, maybe in Bledsoe Said So, alludes to the fact that maybe him leaving his body and moving through solid objects is some sort of trigger for arthritis.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Right.
That was what he kind of thought.
Speculated on.
Yeah.
Huh. Drew has just disconnected his mic live on air.
I did.
I gotta edit that clip. All right. Well, thank you for that comment. And
Yeah, thank you,
any other
Greg.
information about what you're saying about that to put
Greg,
together those pieces?
Keep them coming.
Yeah, that's good stuff. And remember our previous comment where they referenced the 2627 event
Yes.
in the disclosure movement? The name for that person who left the comment changed.
That's probably just because they changed their username.
But I went to their account and it's their original username. Like the username I'm seeing now is the one that they register their account with.
Maybe they just changed how it displays. I don't know.
Yeah, like I thought that too, but then you go here and it's usually their what they create their account with is here, and then whatever they want their account to actually be is up top here. I don't know, it just tripped me out because I remember it being like a Dangerous Dan, and I can't find any comments from Dangerous Dan, and now it's Birdie's Ghost.
Yeah, I don't know what to say.
Because if you go back to our previous episode where we talked about that comment, I say Dangerous Dan, I'm pretty sure. I don't say anything about Birdie's Ghost. I think we're getting
couldn't
Mandela
tell you.
affected right now.
Oh, that's where you're going with this. I was like, dude, I don't know how YouTube works.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like I looked at multiple accounts, and some people do have a different username that's not the name that they chose their account with.
Yeah, I
but
think
this one's not that.
I think there's a display name and like a actual username.
So you're saying that maybe the username was changed to Dangerous Dan, and then after the comment, he changed it back to Birdie's Ghost, which is the actual.
Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, that's possible. I don't know. I thought I was getting Mandela though.
Dangerous Dan, if you're listening, let Drew know that he's being Mandela or not.
It's weird. Yeah, it tripped me out. Anyway, I'm not sure. This buzzing is getting real.
All right, should we just take a quick troubleshooting pause? All right, we'll take a super early first break here. We're going to try and fix this buzzing, and we will be right back after this.
Hurts my ears.
Sorry about that buzzing, people. It should be gone now.
We figured it out. Hopefully, it's not too annoying for the beginning.
Yeah, I'll see what I can
Glad we
do.
took an early break though, because that was an easy fix.
Yeah, and that would have been annoying for a lot longer.
Yeah, I couldn't think.
So when you have microphone cables laying across the ground, you do not want power cables laying across them.
Yep,
And that was what was causing the buzzing.
we're good now. Everything's up on the table. Power cable's down the ground. All right.
We had to rush back from we took a little vape break, and we ended up having a whole conversation about AI. I was like, let's go back inside, fellas.
Yeah, so
But Drew's got some news stories.
So yeah, I've got some news stories. We'll end with the AI stuff, and I know John had some thoughts on that stuff. So This is from, where was the article? I think it was just published online. I'm not sure if it was published on any website or anything, specific website. So this is about nanobot technology.
Oh, okay.
I found this in 1440 and I read the article, and they're claiming that they have nanobot technology now that can kill cancer cells in rats.
I saw that.
Yeah. So this is part of the article that I read. The research group at Karolinska Institute has previously developed structures that can organize so-called death receptors on the surface of cells, leading to cell death. The structure exhibits 6 peptides or amino acid chains assembled in a hexagonal pattern. This hexagonal nano pattern of peptides becomes a lethal weapon, explains Professor Bjorn Hogberg at
Say that last sentence again.
The hexagonal nano pattern of the peptides becomes a lethal weapon. So the organization of these nanobots, the the pattern that they're choosing becomes the lethal weapon, because what it goes on to explain is how they can target specific cells and not disrupt living cells.
I didn't mean to cut you off. You can keep reading.
That's fine. So yeah, this is from Bjorn Hogberg at the Department of Medical Biochemistry and Biophysics at Karolinska Institute. He led the study, and he's quoted saying, "If you were to administer it as a drug, it would indiscriminately start killing cells in the body, which would not be good, obviously. To get around this problem, we have hidden the weapon inside a nanostructure built from DNA."
Interesting.
So they created what they call a kill switch. The art of building nanoscale structures using DNA as a building material is called DNA origami, and is something Bjorn Hogberg's research team has been working on for many years. Now they have used the technique to create a kill switch that is activated under the right conditions. In quotes here, "We have managed to hide the weapon in such a way that it can only be exposed in the environment found in and around a solid tumor," he says. "This means that we have created a type of nanorobot that can specifically target and kill cancer cells. The key is the low pH, or the acidic microenvironment, that usually surrounds a cancer cell, which activates the nanorobot's weapon. In the cell's analysis and test tubes, the researchers were able to show that the peptide weapon is hidden inside the nanostructure at a normal pH of 7.4, but that has a drastic cell-killing effect when the pH drops to 6.5. Another researcher on the team talks about the reduced tumor growth. They then tested injecting the nanorobot into mice with breast cancer tumors. This resulted in a 70% reduction in tumor growth compared to mice given an inactive version of the nanorobot. This is Yang Wang, one of the researchers. He's quoted saying, "We now need to investigate whether this works in more advanced cancer models that more closely resemble the real human disease." So this is from the first author of the paper, a researcher. He's also a researcher at the same institute. "We also need to find out what side effects the method has before it can be tested in humans." The researchers also plan to investigate whether it is possible to make the nanorobot more targeted by placing proteins or peptides on its surface that specifically bind to certain types of cancer. The research was funded by the Nut and Alice Wallenberg Foundation and the European Research Council, the Swedish Research Council, and the Academy of Finland.
So
this invention will be patented, it says.
Yeah, so nanorobots that go in and kill cancer.
Yeah.
Interesting.
least the early stages of it.
Yeah. No, I mean, clearly it's like awesome technology.
Yeah.
But I don't really like that approach. You're just putting a killing machine into your body, and if there are unforeseen ways in which the controls can be stripped from it, like it could go around just indiscriminately killing other bits of your body.
I would say there would have to be some kind of way of retrieving these after.
Yeah.
Like putting them in, injecting them in, and then having some sort of like magnetized magnet event, like some sort of thing where you can like pull these things back out of the body.
Okay, so when they say nanorobotics, that doesn't mean they're made of metal.
No, I get it. But unless they're destructive, then you would still want a way of
Yeah. So I don't
getting them out.
The reason I don't like is we still haven't done an episode about like cancer cures, and there's a few
That's true.
rumored ones out there.
Might be more effective.
And then B, there's also Michael Levin's work, which is another episode we have yet to do. His work is all about, it's like, what is the word he uses? Well, he started out studying morphogenesis, which is like how cells, as they divide, like know what part of the body they're a part of and know what group to become. Like, how does a group of cells know that it's part of your arm? How does a group of cells know that it's part of your leg?
Is this the guy? Sorry,
Go ahead.
John again. Is this the guy who talks about like the frog?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where they're like regrowing limbs.
Did you
and
talk
stuff.
about that on the podcast?
We haven't. I think
dude.
we've mentioned it.
We've
but
mentioned
we're
it a
gonna,
couple
I want to do
times.
an entire episode about his work.
Sorry to cut you off.
No, you're good. So yeah, like in the instances of like frogs or certain like
Amphibians that can regrow their limbs.
Like if a limb is removed, like how does the limb then know
What it's making.
when to grow, how far to grow? How does it know when the hand that it's regrowing is big enough? Right? Like why doesn't it keep growing till it's gigantic? Like how does it know when it's reached the proper size? And his work says that essentially what's going on is that your cells are joining into like a neighborhood collective where they use electric fields to identify where in the collective they are.
Where there's
It's a memory.
to be.
Right.
It's a memory.
So they can detect, like, based on the charges that are surrounding them, they can detect where in the structure they are, and they can know if they need to move a little bit this way or a little bit that way.
And this is research that this guy's like discovering this about.
Yeah, and one of the things he's saying as like the No, any type of cell.
Oh, okay. They have that understanding amongst the cells.
Yeah,
with,
is that
like
cells are using electric fields to create like an image for themselves of where they are, where they're supposed to be.
Interesting.
It's like they all have a memory of how they were connected and what was the most closely related neighbor that they can reference. So like there's always like from the spot that it was amputated all the way back up to the end of the limb, it knows exactly how it was put together. And then the DNA the cells and in the DNA knows exactly how to rebuild it.
Right. And so they're doing research on these nematodes, which are this really simple little like worm-like creature. And it's got a head and it's got a tail. And they apparently have one of the most disastrous genomes. Like it's just a mess.
It's just a jumble of everything.
Like, it's just a bunch of junk. And the reason is because the way they reproduce is not through sexual reproduction, not through using their genetics. They don't divide. What they do is they get damaged. Like if something comes along and like
so like a plant.
Well, no, if you chop it in half, each half will regrow into a full new creature.
Yeah.
So they're clones of each other more than total.
Yeah, like plants in a sense. You chop off a part of a plant and you replant it. You can
certain
you can clone them.
Right. Like
right. Certain plants can do that. Yeah.
It's abiogenesis. It's like a weird thing that like both parts of whatever was severed can regrow fully.
So he's gotten enough of an understanding of how to manipulate the electric field that now when they cut a nematode in half, they can manipulate the electric field and make it grow back as two heads or grow back as two tails.
Whoa.
Yeah.
So they
I
can
didn't know
actually.
that they can manipulate it.
They can
That's
manipulate
I thought
it.
it was just that
He
they
has an
understand
understanding of it, and he knows how to manipulate it.
So
Yeah.
okay, and this is maybe a too serious of a question for this podcast.
No.
But can we regrow Bruce Willis? If we have a piece of his matter, and we have the ability, you know what I'm saying?
Dude,
Like,
there's
to-
already
to
people trying to clone
manipulate how
dinosaurs.
things grow. Let's just grow Bruce Willis back.
100%.
Right? He already gave us all of his. What
So,
do you call it?
yeah,
Like,
we've all
the
seen,
to
like-
his likeness.
So the reference you're missing there is when we were on our break, we were talking about how AI or how Bruce Willis specifically gave away the rights to his likeness, and we were talking about how AI can
Sold.
generate.
I don't think it was
Well, he's-
charitable
I'm sure.
donation.
Yeah, no, I'm sure he sold it. Sure, but
Probably, yeah.
I'm
His
sure he
family's
did, yeah.
reaping those benefits.
I'm sure his daughter or somebody is making money off that.
Yeah.
Anyway, but Bruce Willis is now possibly going to be the next or the first never to die action star.
Yes, and then so we started joking about Die Hard.
Die Hard,
Die
Never
Hard
to
2,
Die.
Never Die, Die Harder.
Will never die.
The last one will be, well, I just can't die anymore.
And then there'll be another one. So yeah, I mean, if we can clone, it's possible. If he's given up some of his DNA so
Yeah.
that cloning is possible in the future.
But back to Michael Levin and why I
Yeah,
brought it up
yeah,
because of the cancer thing is that what he says is that what cancer is it is a group of cells who are essentially losing the signal of what role they're supposed to play in their community.
That's his
Work with the little
Yeah. Well,
creature
they're-
that you were talking about.
So he talks about how like a cell is like maybe you could call it one of the most fundamental units of selfhood, right? Like
Right.
a little tiny cell like has a whatever certain sense of self. There's an outside and an inside, right? But if a cell is part of an organ, it's part of a bigger self. And then that organ is part of a body, that's part of a bigger self, right? But like in the intermediary between those, the cell is part of like whatever local tissue, and that has an electric field that tells that cell in its place what role and function it's supposed to be playing.
So
and-
cancer.
Cancer is a cell whose self has shrunken back down to itself, and so now
No
it's only
longer
living
relates.
for itself. It's not
Yeah.
playing nice as part of the community. And he says,
And those
and he
clump
says
up.
they've done this too,
Those
like
grow.
in certain like more primitive animals, but like you can get a tumor to turn back into healthy tissue by reintegrating it into the electric environment, which is what tells it, hey, you're not an individual, you are part of a big larger self.
It's basically like giving the cell some mushrooms and being like, yo, you're part of this big system. You need to get
And
on
it
board
It
here.
has an awakening.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Wow.
So if we had the option of telling your tumor to just be part of your
Or
body again,
nanorobots.
or nanorobots going in, hunting and seeking and destroying, and
Yeah.
if something goes wrong, they destroy good tissue.
Yeah.
You know, like,
That's what I mean. You just need to get some kind of mechanism to get them out.
but still really cool tech.
Yeah.
Also terrifying. Nanorobots
yeah.
are terrifying.
It depends on how it's used, right?
Yeah.
So let's
It's one of those things, though, that like people can use it and you'll never know. You know,
Right. Like
it's like ultimate spycraft weaponry.
That
You
happens
know,
with
Yeah, I
a
mean,
lot
if
of
you get
things, right?
injected with
release
anything.
it, right? Or whatever, and then you find out 5-10 years, whatever amount of time that like, oh, there's this fault in it. Is that what
Right.
you mean? by
Mm-hmm.
that?
yeah, or like.
Or like the code
just
that's
saying-
written, like it's no longer used and it now answers to nobody and now it's just doing its own thing.
You can see a
on,
spy
like,
or
some
an
primitive
assassin
code
like
or-
sitting next to someone at the bar and they're just
Yeah.
like touching their drink, not the person not realizing they're about to drink a bunch of nanorobots that are going to take over.
Yeah. And they have the
know?
control over it.
Wild.
I honestly, they might already be in use. We can't say that they're not. So let's change
You have
topics a
the
little
other
bit.
story.
This is on BBC's website, bbc.com. The forgotten priest who predicted black holes in 1783.
What?
Almost 200 years ago, before scientists accepted black holes exist a British clergyman called John Mitchell published some surprisingly prescient ideas about the strange cosmic objects. Why isn't his work better known? The existence of black holes is a bewildering thought, especially in light of the ideas that billions of them could populate the cosmos. For decades in the 20th century, eminent physicists refused to believe they could be real, ignoring what the mathematics predicted. These doubters even included Albert Einstein, whose own theory of general relativity made black holes possible. However, there was one person who showed remarkable prescience about black holes, and did so long before Einstein was even born. Using only Newtonian laws, a little-known British clergyman named John Mitchell anticipated these astronomical strange objects in some important and surprising ways. All the way back in the 18th century. Who was Mitchell? What did he predict, and why were his ideas mostly forgotten? I won't go over his history, but he was born in 1724 in a village, and grew up to love science. I'll pick up here. With a plentiful supply of coffee houses and intimate community of just 400 students. Oh, that's weird. So in 1750, he published a paper on magnetism, introducing at least one entirely new law, the inverse square law, that furthered the application of magnets in navigation. In 1760, he published a paper on the mechanics of earthquakes. So these are all his things he's done. Mm-hmm. After leaving Cambridge in 1764, he married a woman in Thornhill in Yorkshire, who later died and remarried. Anyway, from the 21st century perspective, the idea of an employee of the Christian church being at the heart of scientific life might seem surprising, but like most 18th century intellectuals, Mitchell would not have made the distinction between religion and science. As Newton had written in 1704, our duty towards God as well as towards one another will appear to us by the light of nature. So basically, the science will prove the idea of God.
Right.
So Mitchell had been working on a torsion balance, which is interesting. Remember back at the Y-files of the Kardashev mirror? He uses the principle of torsion.
Yeah. That was the time travel thing, wasn't it?
Yeah. So working on a torsion balance, a device that would help allow him to estimate the density of planet Earth through measuring the gravitational attraction between lead weights. Mitchell died before the apparatus, but after his death, the Cavendish who conducted the experiment in 1797, he was able to calculate the density of the Earth within 1% of the value now accepted. So basically what they're saying is he predicted this. Oh, here it is.
Yeah.
In the same year that Mitchell had died, Cavendish published a paper containing the hypothesis that though it was to prove less scientifically durable, was perhaps his most brilliant in its perceptiveness. Using Newtonian principles, it started by explaining how the density of stars could be established by observing the way their gravitation affected the nearby bodies. So basically just by looking at the sky and learning the math and knowing it, he was able to predict using mathematics.
Where's the black hole part?
that was kind of it. It was just the foresight of like the mathematics. Like he laid the foundation.
Yeah.
And he knew.
So I asked Perplexity. So this is an AI answer, so it could be a hallucination. So take that with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
But Perplexity AI says that on November 27th, 1783, Mitchell presented a paper to the Royal Society of London in which he described the possibility of celestial bodies so massive and dense that light could not escape their gravitational pull. Mitchell based his reasoning on Newton's corpuscular theory of light, which treated light as consisting of tiny particles. He calculated that a star 500 times the size of the sun would have a gravitational pull so strong that light would be unable to escape it, rendering that object invisible. He suggested that while these objects would be invisible, their presence might be detected by observing the gravitational effects on other visible celestial bodies.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was 10 years ish.
Yeah, but his concept fell into obscurity and had to be rediscovered in the 20th century after Einstein came out with relativity.
Yeah, so he had these ideas before, and it wasn't until Einstein that those theories were accepted.
No, I mean, it makes sense. Like with Newton's insights that gravity is linked to mass, right? And then with the proposed idea that light is actually a tiny particle, then you would have to assume that light would be affected by gravity. So if you're good enough at math, you could figure out the math on how much gravity it would take to stop light from being able to move.
But then just to assume that that's out there, like what's the evidence that it's out there?
Well, that doesn't necessarily mean he actually thought they existed. He just
mathematically it was possible
that like if these things are true, then these types of things are possible.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Huh.
Where are we at here? Do you want to start a little bit on some of the stuff you've listened to?
So since we had just been talking about AI, I just want to like make this known to people who may not have heard of it. So one of the big AI companies out there right now that specializes in speech, called ElevenLabs. And they have an app they just released for iPhone. I don't know if it exists for Android yet. I don't think it does. But the ElevenLabs app allows you to input any text into it, and then it will read that text to you in whatever voice you choose. So it's essentially an audiobook, and you can input PDFs, you can input EPUBs, you can input and you can copy and paste text in there. And they've just released this week the first handful of like famous celebrities. I think they got Burt Reynolds and Judy Garland. And,
oh wow!
Yeah, so
a lot of recognizable voices.
Now, if I'm ever buying a book, I'm going to buy the EPUB version so that I can just upload
it in there. You
into
got your audiobook right there.
And there's the audiobook for me.
And you can read along with it.
I don't know if it probably wouldn't have all the same ability to like pause and bookmark and stuff, but pretty cool.
Yeah. No, it's definitely useful.
So check out the ElevenLabs iOS app.
ElevenLabs.
And you can turn any of your documents into free audiobooks.
So another thing is now with all this AI stuff coming out, YouTube.
I'll leave a link to that.
Okay. YouTube now lets you request removal of AI generated content that simulates your face and voice. So they're getting ahead of the game when it comes to this stuff, when your likeness is being used without your knowledge.
Right.
So maybe not ahead. The things will probably have been posted for them to be able to detect them, but
right,
it's good news.
Totally. Okay. See, we got another 20 minutes before our next break. So, do you want to cover one of the talks you listened to?
I was gonna let you start.
Okay. All right. I'll go first. This one could end up taking up the whole show, so I'll do this one because this one had me freaking excited. I was loving this talk. So this is a talk. It's on day one Yang.
Okay.
It's the second talk on the day one Yang video. So the guy's name is Paul Schatzkin. Schatzkin? I don't know if it's Shat. Probably not Shat.
Probably Shat. He definitely Schatzkin. Yeah. Paul Schatzkin.
So he deems himself a biographer of obscure 20th century scientists, and he's a communication major, and it shows because his presentation was super professional. It was a mix of like videos and images. It was just really well done. So please don't. This is not a replacement for that. Once the Cosmic Summit videos come out, you'll have to check it out for yourself. Anyway, so he named his talk "Back to the Future" is prologue. And essentially, well, yeah. Let me just kind of follow along with his reasoning here. He's basically saying that multiple times in history, Hollywood and like fictional productions have sort of predicted the path of technology.
Yeah.
He's got this interesting quote here by Eden Philpotts. The universe is filled with magical things, patiently waiting for our wits to grow sharper. That's a cool.
That is a nice quote.
Yeah. So he pulls up this, he shows this example from one of the oldest productions ever. If you ever seen, what's that movie? I know you've seen it. It's like based in, it's like an old Hollywood movie. It's like based in a train station, like has to do with Hugo.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. Steven Spielberg.
Yeah. And it had to do with like the old man there that Hugo becomes friends with. Like he's like an old Hollywood guy or whatever.
Oh.
Yeah. Anyway,
I've never seen that movie. Yeah.
It references this this early production. It's called A Trip to the Moon, and he actually shows the video of it.
I've seen some of it and other stuff. Yeah.
So it's like these guys that were like rocket to the moon and they like splat into it
in like way old.
Yeah,
cinematic,
super old cinematic.
Yeah.
It was like before talkies existed.
Yeah.
Movies were called movies because it was just moving.
Yeah,
and there would be like a person in there on piano playing the music because they didn't have like recorded audio along with it yet. So then I think they called them talkies for a while after that. Once they added audio, so this was before the talkie era, but so everything was like mimed. But anyway, this was back in 1905, and in 1905, we did not have rocket technology yet. So he was showing this as like an example of how like Hollywood or
predicted
like works of art
technology.
Can predict technology. And then he shows how, later in the 60s, we finally landed on the moon, all that.
With Apollo 11, the movie.
Yeah. So what inspired his whole like scientific biography profession was this conversation he had with a person. And he left it really mysterious back in 1973. He's like, we'll circle back to that. But he's got these 2 books, okay?
So he had a conversation that he like was profound for him, and then but he doesn't, as far as this timing.
Yeah, because we don't have all the context for what makes that conversation important yet. He'll circle back to it later.
Got it.
But he talks about these 2 books he wrote. One is called The Boy Who Invented Television, and one is called The Man Who Mastered Gravity. And the television one is about Philo T. Farnsworth, and the gravity one is about T. Townsend Brown. Do you recognize Townsend Brown?
Townsend Brown, yeah. Yeah, he was one of the scientists fundamental to gravity. Yes. But he was taken into like private corporations, right?
Exactly. He's one of those.
He was one of those mystery scientists that disappeared during that time. So
Philo Farnsworth This is a quote from him. When Picasso was experimenting with Duco cement, this man was drawing with electrons. Or I guess this is what he's saying about Farnsworth. So he invented, or I guess at the time, the all that existed at the time was mechanical television, which is just like manually rotating.
Yeah.
But he actually invented the cathode ray technology that gave us CRT TVs, which is what lasted all the way up until LCD technology came out.
That was like the projector technology.
Yeah. So then he talks about how he was obviously influenced by Einstein. He talks a little bit about Einstein here. He's got this label under Einstein's photo, says some obscure Swiss patent clerk circa 1905. So Einstein had these 4 papers published in 1905. One is on heuristic point of view concerning the production and transformation of light, which had to do with how light interacts with electricity. Yes. Like how light and electricity are related. Then he's got another one on the motion of small particles suspended in liquids at rest required by the molecular kinetic theory of heat. Then on the electrodynamics of moving bodies, that one is his special relativity. And then he's got one called Does the Inertia of a Body Depend Upon Its Energy Content? And this one is like his general relativity. But I thought that came a lot later, not in 1905. Anyway, so he talks a little bit about Einstein and how Einstein created or discovered the photoelectric effect. He discovered E equals mc squared with general relativity. I don't remember why he talks about this.
Probably because it was like with the image on the right. It's
this is from Back to the Future.
Totally relates from Back to the Future.
Yeah,
as far as like
I think I didn't take screenshots of his Back to the Future photos in the beginning, but essentially what he's claiming at the start of this talk is that Back to the Future is another one of those movies that's
going to predict our future.
The future, right? But more than that, I'll just skip to that part because it's super interesting. More than that, if you get to... Do you remember what Doc Brown's name is in Back to the Future? What his first name is?
I should.
It's Dr. Emmett Brown.
Yeah, that's right.
So check this out. If you drop off the first part of his first name, it makes him T.T. Brown, which is Townsend Brown.
Interesting.
Which, doesn't necessarily mean a lot. But also, when he comes back from the future and at the end of the first movie and he picks up Marty and Jen, he's like, we need to go back to the future. And remember, he like grabs the garbage out of there and he's like, what are you doing, Doc? He's like, I'm refilling. And he's like dumping like garbage into this fusion engine, his Mr. Fusion engine, right? So he's saying that they're hinting that T.T. Brown had to do with fusion. And what's the thing that makes the time machine work?
The flux capacitor.
The flux capacitor. And so in this talk, he ends up talking about how capacitors are probably have to do with how gravity and electric phenomena interact with each other. And so,
like in a natural way, like
he's pointing out that it's pretty weird that T.T. Doc Emmett Brown made a fusion reactor and had a flux capacitor.
I could certainly see the inspiration. Like if somebody knew about T.T. Brown and was also a scientific, like wanted to do science fiction movies, they could be like, this would be a great like little Easter egg for our movie,
Right.
So whether it's really predictive or not, that's still to be You know?
Yeah. So in this case, it would be more like it's just encoded
You're right.
secrets, right? Like
Right.
it's calling, like it's referencing
Yeah.
Townsend Brown.
Right. And the ideas he was before he went dark and
And the
he
types
didn't
of
know anything
the
about
types of technologies
Yeah,
that he was
working on. Yeah.
right. So Farnsworth was born 1906, Beaver Creek, Utah. He invented the cathode-ray tube. So previous to him, so there's two parts involved in television, right? There's the part where you have to convert electricity into light, and that part we've been able to do. We had been able to do. But there's the other part, which is like turning light into
an
electricity,
Oh,
which is what you then
The
do
image.
in order to create an image, right? But in order to create an image, you need to be able to turn photons into electric signals. Right? So that each pixel can detect a photon, send an electric signal that it detected one. They're converting photons to electric signals. So he's the one that invented how that works.
so seems like magic
It's so
technically.
crazy to me, just like how many pleasures we have
Yeah.
that are like, there is masterful people behind the creation of these
Yeah.
things.
Freaking
Yeah.
Really take it for
super
granted.
genius
No idea.
nerds.
Insane.
You wouldn't
Yeah.
have an idea unless you like.
No,
question
we just
it.
enjoy them.
Wait, but how? But
Right.
why? Why is this working?
Right.
Yeah, it's fascinating learning
Yeah.
this stuff.
So he invented this the cathode ray tube, and then the RCA, which is Radio Corporation of America, right? RCA actually presented the first like consumer television at the New York World's Fair in 1939 after he had
at that.
invented it.
Now we add sight to sound, he says.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the actual aha, is that like these scientists are doing science and then there's people who figure out how to monetize that.
Right, how to turn it into a commercial product.
Yeah, how can I create a product that I can make money off of this technology?
Right.
Which is like a no-brainer, like, but still, it's just, yeah, anyway.
The scientists do the work of making it possible. It's like I don't know what the phenomenon is, but like once a record has been broken, it just continues to be broken. Like even though nobody thought it was possible, like as soon as a scientist says something is possible, there's people who can be like, oh, like let's figure out a way to make that marketable and make,
right. So
bring
it's the
it to people
scientist's
and
job
do
is to
something.
like when they discover like a new law of nature or something, right? It's their job to like figure out how we can manipulate it, right? But
Yeah.
once we do that, once that's been figured out and now we can sort of interact with reality in this given way, like someone has to then come along and like, okay, how do we turn that into products?
How do you apply this science?
Right.
Is really
Right.
what these people are doing.
Right. That's what makes you rich. Like
yeah, capitalists are obviously like
Writing
Well,
out-
and that's
making
what
money
makes it
on this.
affect humans enough to be something that is continued to be researched, right? So once it becomes a product that people are like, this is invaluable, that then gives the credibility to the scientists doing the work to find out these things, and then it just continues the cycle. So
Yeah.
if there's no product that comes of it, what happens,
Then
right?
what-
So like
well,
you
yeah.
have all these great ideas, but there's no product that you can offer the world with it. That's really where it ends until the scientists can come up with something that makes it marketable and makes it usable.
Do scientists get to piggyback on what you're saying, Drew? Like, do scientists end up like basically going like, okay, I want to start working on this science because it seems like I'm gonna probably come up with something that's gonna get me more funding, right? Like I'm going down this avenue of science that seems to be profitable, which
Right.
means you keep getting funding. Is that I'm basically just
100%.
asking like.
No, it's 100%.
I'm asking a question. Is that influential to scientists deciding what they're going to study?
I think,
it very well can be.
yeah.
Yes.
I think
But
that the profitability of a
depends on
certain
what-
field is
Well,
definitely a draw for some
science
people.
isn't a monolith, right?
No, yeah.
like
But
not
still-
all science is done the same way in the same setting. Like not all of it's done at universities,
Right.
not all of it's done in corporations. Some of it's done in someone's
private
workshops.
Yeah.
Some of it's done, like in religious
In a-
institutions.
yeah,
right?
or in some sort of, like,
depends
small
on the
community or
setting,
something,
right?
yeah.
So like if you're talking an academic in a university
That's what I'm
setting,
thinking of. I'm
then-
thinking of like these people who try to get these high profile positions at universities where they're getting their funding for their research, right?
Yeah.
Like, do they end up sort of going toward a specific line of research specifically because there's higher probability of getting funding in that?
Yes.
I think for some scientists, yes.
Yeah.
Some scientists will pursue just where their curiosity takes them.
Okay. But
But if you end up down a track that you find you have a hard time getting funding for, then you're less marketable to a
So that's the
university
thing.
or laboratory to work
So
for
to
them.
have reliable funding, yes, a lot of the time if you want reliable funding, that's not going to end just because you didn't find something that's going to lead to a product for them. Then yeah, like you probably want to go do a line of research that's going to continue to make you money. But if you're going for just a passion project and it's something that you're really into, a lot of times the funding's harder. You got to raise money, you got to get people aware, you got to or you got to be doing something on the breaking edge, the cutting edge of technology where the funding might not be there in the beginning, but it will come,
are there scientists who, these are literally like base level questions because I don't understand how like a lot of these, but like do these scientists have to get approval from their from people higher than them to do passion projects? Like if they're getting funding, can they use some of that funding to pursue passion
Personal
projects
stuff.
if they're not having to use all of the funding to do their initial research? Or maybe it's
if it's taxpayer money, yes, probably.
Well, depending on the funding source, because some funding will come like earmarked for certain things.
Okay. So
Some
it's-
funding will come just
That
to
makes
fund
sense.
an institution.
But if it's tax money, then it's going wherever we don't know, and they can fund whatever they want. And they can have however
I'll
much
give
money
you-
they
I
want.
wish there was just like, basically what I'm trying to say is like my desire for science and this type of stuff, right? Like these guys were doing amazing work, right? And like there's a lot of things that came from it. So like the people who are doing their passion projects, it would be sick if there was like a general fund or some way that they can be also funded.
Yes.
So
Even
that
if they
can
don't-
really dig in
Yeah.
and like make a livelihood and support their families, right? But
And not
also
stress
still
about
be doing stuff
doing
that's
that,
like
yeah.
maybe fringe science. I get like there's a whole economic structure behind that, but
Yeah,
that would be my hope for the world.
100%. I
So
agree.
my example for that is, if you remember the reincarnation episode series that we did,
Yeah.
that was me covering the book Life After Life by Ian Stevenson. No, by
It was a book by somebody else that was he worked with Ian
he
Stevenson
worked
on all
with
the
Ian
research.
Stevenson. Anyway, so Ian Stevenson, though, he talks about Ian Stevenson's history doing that research. So Ian Stevenson collected thousands and thousands of reincarnation cases by traveling all over the world and investigating them. He did work. He was a professor at a university, but his university wasn't super thrilled about his research. And so his funding was drying up. But he actually found a rich donor who, as a private entity, was willing to cut him checks to keep funding his research. So he would send funding, and the university didn't want to say no to money coming in, even though the money was specifically earmarked for Stevenson's research, and they weren't super thrilled about that. They also aren't in the business of sending away money.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And so Ian Stevenson was able to spend his career doing this reincarnation research because of some rich guy who just funded him.
Yeah.
And then after he died, he was worried the funding was going to dry up, the rich guy. But he actually left it in his will, a big fat like dowry for them to like continue the research. But it was specifically earmarked that it was only to go towards Ian Stevenson's like project, like the reincarnation research,
Very
that type
cool.
of stuff. And so Ian Stevenson was able to set up a department at his university that studied that sort of non-conventional stuff.
Because he had the funding and he didn't have to use
Right,
resources of the college.
He didn't have to ask the college for the funding,
Yeah.
because if he had to ask the college, then he would
have to rein in his ideas.
he would have
a
to
bit.
ask their permission, essentially.
Right.
But if you're a tenured professor, then you're a professor for life. So as long as you don't do something illegal or unethical,
You're locked.
then
They can't fire you
They can't really
necessarily.
fire you,
Yeah.
right? So as far as doing research and spending funds, they don't have to fund you still, though. So if you can come up with an independent funding source, then within the academic framework, you can essentially be free to do what you need.
Cool. That's cool.
So the book Life Before Life was written by Jim B. Tucker
That's right. Jimmy Tucker.
with a foreword by Ian Stevenson.
All right, we're actually ready for our second break now, so we'll come back and continue talking about this this chat. So, go ahead.
Sorry to hijack for a second there, guys, with my
Not
stupid
at
questions.
all. No, we need this. I think
is all
this is
part
great.
of like
That's
the
good.
conversation. I think it's great.
I love having a third person here too.
Yeah.
we're gonna do this more.
Hopefully I can just be like a live voice of like some of the questions you people out there would want to ask.
Yeah.
Because I'm pretty lay. Not that you guys are lay, but I'm a lay person compared to these two.
Nah.
Just happy to be here.
All right, we'll be back in just a minute.
Adios. Welcome back to what's the if duality is 2, what would be 3?
Thrisality.
Triality.
Thrisality.
Is that a word? Triality check.
I like
Since you're here,
I like triality.
welcome back to Triality check.
So I just figured out my Mandela effect.
Oh, what was it?
So Dangerous Davies 2008 was the person who commented, leaving that message.
But it wasn't where you thought
But
it was.
I went to our notifications and I saw it in there as Dangerous Davies 2008 as the notification. But I click on it and it takes me to Birdie's Ghost page. So he did have a different name before.
He must, yeah,
So
must
it
have
wasn't a
changed.
Mandela. We've just solved the mystery.
We're just out here doxing our listeners. Cool. So yeah, we were talking about the talk. So yeah, this is what's the dude's name? Yeah, Farnsworth, Philo Farnsworth. This was his first sketch of a video recording tube.
Recording?
Yeah. So this is the reverse. This is taking photons and turning them into an electrical
Electricity.
signal.
Yeah.
And shortly after this, he got funded and was able to have his first lab, aka Video City, in San Francisco. And he got some press. SF Man's invention to revolutionize television.
Look how small that TV is.
I know, this first
For
TV
how
is
big
this
the thing
giant
is.
box that looks like a jukebox just for this tiny little picture here.
Like 10-inch screen.
Yeah.
So there's just a lot of his accolades.
Interestingly, he was also recruited to be part of the Manhattan Project, but he had, one of the sub-projects that was feeding into the sub-Manhattan Project, because it was all compartmentalized, right? And he had a suspicion with what it was about, and he refused to be a part of it.
Really?
Yeah.
At least there's one good person, huh?
Yeah. And then Paul, the guy giving the talk, he gives this Paul Schatzkin. He gives this he shows this email that one of his readers or someone had sent him. And this was after the reader had followed his work on I can never keep this guy's name in my head. I forgot that's Townsend Brown, but the other guy.
Paul Schatzkin?
No, the Farnsworth.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, so he did all this work on Farnsworth, and then he was written to by someone who recommended he look into Townsend Brown. And this was the email from the person that sent to him. He said, T. Townsend Brown was another inventor who was forgotten and swept under the rug. He died on Catalina Island around 1985. If you haven't heard of him, just type his name into a decent search engine. His family site should come up. Or you might find him on Scientific Anomalies. Science in the late 50s said what he did was against physical law, yet the government classified his work. A bunch of government contractors, both American and foreign, have been working on it ever since. So where did the R&D go? If you go out to the desert about 125 miles southwest of Las Vegas at night, you will see an object flying around in the distance with a blush haze around it. That's where it went. Also, Smarter Image is selling an air purifier on cable for 60 plus, and he never collected the royalties for that either. So he's saying that the ionic breeze was actually based on
his technology.
Townsend Brown's technology. Is
But
it
he
uses
just,
like
instead
an
of
anomalous
collecting the
electrical effect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he invented it, but is not collecting royalties. And this is all happened similar to the time where he went dark and started, and a lot of his work went underground.
So this part of the talk, he switches to talking about Townsend Brown. And yeah, so he talks about that there's a link between electromagnetism and gravity. That he was involved in development of solid disc shape apparatuses.
Solid disc.
He researched temporary localized gravitational fields, and that it is the proposed propulsion method for some observed UFOs. But the ionic breeze is based on an electric effect discovered by Brown as a teenager.
And this is where the ions are like bonding they're like grabbing things out of the air, right?
Yeah.
Like the charged plates are like essentially they are creating these ions that are grabbing electrically static, and it's like grabbing stuff out of it's like solid objects out of the air. It's like, it's interesting.
And he so some people think that essentially the same technology that the ionic breeze is based on is essentially like similar to his later classified work, but that his later classified work works in different arrangements, but obviously with way higher power levels.
So, if I remember correctly, T. Townsend Brown's the idea of what his work ended up being was replicated by other people, but was essentially where he had this electromagnetic effect where like it was like ions chasing each other. It was like a negative charged ion and a positive charged ion on different surfaces, and it was continually chasing. The positive was continually chasing the negative, or vice versa.
Vice versa, but
the negative was always chasing the positive.
Yeah,
and it basically is able to move solid objects by this fundamental process where you would have to have a completely solid, and it would have to be all one piece. But you'd have an area of it that is positively charged and an area of it that's negatively charged, or you have some sort of core that's attached and it propels this thing.
Right, and they have to be separated by some sort of insulator.
Right.
And that you have to run like millions of volts through it.
Right.
And so that you want the positive side to be slightly smaller than the negative side.
So
and
then the negative
side will constantly chasing the positive.
Because if it was bigger, then it would die off before the positive would.
Right. So
the effect would die off.
This is essentially what set that discovery in motion for him. So there's this thing called the Coolidge X-ray tube. Here's a photo of it. I'll put that on the show. So this thing just looks like a light bulb with two sockets. It normally, when it's used, it's like mounted to something, right? But Townsend Brown experimented hanging it, and he noticed that when he would pass voltage through it, the thing would push to one side.
When hung.
Yeah. Which is something you can't notice if it's hard mounted to something. Yeah. But when you have it dangling, you can see that it wants to move.
So then he messed around with that effect.
So he started digging into that effect, right? So he ended up at this university called in Granville, Ohio.
Swayze Observatory.
Yeah, Swayze Observatory at Denison University in Granville, Ohio. And he ended up working with this Dr. Paul Alfred Biefeld. And he was also interested in the same sorts of questions that Townsend Brown was. And so they were having a conversation about like how to couple electricity with gravity, right? And so they're asking the question, if a coupling did exist, if there was some way to connect these two fields, what would it look like? And it was Biefeld that said, well, it probably would resemble a capacitor. And so he pops up the image of the flux capacitor again. He's like, huh? Somebody said capacitor? So then he talks about capacitors and how they work,
how they function,
how they separate, positive and electric, and all these different
stored
functions that a capacitor has, like energy storage, energy filtering, timing, coupling, decoupling, signal processing.
Timing, that's a big one.
Yeah. And then they talk about the Biefeld-Brown effect, right? And so this is the Biefeld-Brown effect, which is that you have two plates. One of them is negatively charged. One of them is positively charged. You have a insulator in between, and then you run millions of volts through the system. And
to charge it.
It causes the negatively charged disc or plate to chase the positively charged plate. And
infinitely.
It doesn't matter which way it's pointed.
Oriented.
And if you notice, this sure looks a lot like a UFO. But if this is like the bottom of the UFO and this is the top of the UFO, and you continue to build it out, right? Like this
you'd
would
eventually
be the
get
hollow place
closer
that you're inside of.
Yeah.
Like, boom.
Yep. Or you even get to a point where you can move those closer together, so it looks like one continuous shape of the UFO shape, right? without having any kind of separation that makes it look like a Vimana or something. Which maybe that was their primitive technology. Maybe that was their first iteration, right? The ancient Vimanas and all these different like accounts of like UFOs in ancient history.
Interesting.
It's like their first iterations of traveling at this, but then nowadays they have more modern looking.
So yeah, they say the whole system is called an asymmetric capacitor.
Well, wait, real quick.
Yeah.
So you're saying, what you just said is like, imagine you being in the middle of those two plates.
Yeah.
But that wouldn't, how does it propel, how does it just stay up in empty space though?
Because when the voltage is applied to the system, the negative chases the positive. So even if they're attached, which means they move. So if you take the whole thing and turn it this way and then you run voltage through it, it will lift, even against gravity.
Whoa.
So the distance
which
showed
is
there,
basically UFO tech.
That's tested. That's like...
So these are
controversial
kind of theories, yeah.
Okay.
A lot of physicists will tell you that the Biefeld-Brown effect isn't real, or it only works at such crazy voltages that like we don't have the power to run these things anyway.
That says 1,000,000 volts.
Yeah.
Can we can do that?
We can do that, but it's a lot of power.
Okay. Like a non-practical amount of power.
Like
we wouldn't have a way of...
No matter how efficient you made a car engine, you're probably not going to get 1,000,000 volts out of it.
Okay.
Yeah,
At least
we're talking about
usable power.
You'd have to be having you'd have to have nuclear plants all over to like be able to, like if these were readily available and used, or if this was like the next technology that we have, we'd have to have like a ridiculous amount of energy that can
it
supply
requires
this.
for these to work, it requires an immense amount of power.
Okay. So aside from it being practically usable on like a wide scale, if you had a very specific test, right?
I think I've seen black and white videos of these things working.
Well, there was actually like current students at like MIT and like other like engineering schools where they use this idea. They take positively and negatively charged fields and they put them in, like when you see them like do their little like competitions where they like see who can build the most effective plane out of the least amount of materials. Like there's like certain, like there were some kids that were doing
I've seen this
like test flights.
All right, so I'll link this video. I don't know if there's any audio that goes with this.
No cool music or anything. Dang.
See that thing right there?
Yeah, it's an image of like an aluminum triangle, and they're turning a knob that's like changing the voltage or something.
That's the Biefeld-Brown effect. Oh.
So those strings there holding it down are because the whatever the upper,
because they still need to have power into
this is wire, and this is positively charged, and this is negatively charged, and because this is so much smaller than the negatively charged, it's the negatively charged is chasing after that positively charged wire
going around the top that looks like a barbed wire fence up there.
Yeah,
that's the positive charge, and then down here is the negative.
Okay.
And then these ones, are keeping it on the ground.
Right, from just going off.
And then it looks like there's a couple thin wires feeding in to feed power to the system. Yeah. So this works, but the question is, like, can you get it to be usable?
Can you scale it up?
Right. Can you get it to actually, like, lift usable amounts of weight?
Yeah.
And also to carry its power plant on board. Right.
Yeah, I mean, I'd imagine there might be some sort of like stable, like if you were to discover this and you invested a bunch of resources into that, eventually you get to a point where you can scale it up. But it's more about, can you control it? Can you make sure that it's not just going to infinitely shoot in one direction and never be able to stop?
Well, because it is not a vehicle.
Right.
that you can
So you would
transport
still
anything
need-
meaningful in.
Right. So you'd still need all this other technology around it.
For how to control it
Yeah.
and whatnot. Yeah.
Yeah.
But if those strings were not there to hold it down to the earth, it
Well,
would just literally just shoot up
Hit the
forever.
roof, probably.
The little
because the
one that
material
we're
itself
watching in the
is-
video, if you were to not have it taped down, it would go up until the wires broke. The wires that are feeding energy to it. Once those wires break, it'll fall down.
Or
So
even
you
if
would
they don't
need-
break, if they just have a
You need
cap
pow-
to the
you
length.
need-
Yeah.
how mu- yeah. Do you know how much power is used for just that example?
No,
How much
I
power is
don't.
used?
Yeah, I
'Cause-
don't know.
Okay, so theoretically, you would need a power source strong enough to create that effect, and then it would need to be a large enough effect created to also hold the thing creating the power for
Yeah,
it to
Correct.
do that,
Yep.
perform that effect.
Right.
Yeah.
You essentially, you'd have to have enough power to compensate for the amount of weight it is, plus what it takes to generate the amount of lift.
Well, computers got smaller over time,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
right? So
Technology is just
This
going
is
to
the-
continue to
this is the
progress. It's not going to
beginning
go
of that.
away.
But if you notice right now, we're obsessed with switching to green energy rather than efficient energy.
Yeah.
And so we're switching to technologies that are not as efficient, but they are cleaner, right? So per pound, gasoline is one of the densest like energy reservoirs that we can convert into energy by running a generator, right? But a generator's heavy, and still that's not enough power to run. Probably not enough power to lift the generator. Like if you built a Biefeld-Brown device with just a standard gasoline motor, I don't think you could build a Biefeld-Brown effect device big enough to lift that generator that's
Okay.
running it.
yeah,
You would need way more energy.
yeah, like you can get the effect, you just won't get the payload. You won't get the beef of it.
Right. And if
So the million, whatever the million volts was, I'm curious whether that was like you were curious about too. Like that was what probably sparked the conversation. Like the
Right,
million,
so-
what does the million volts get you?
So-
does it just get you liftoff, or does it give you some sort of payload?
So
alongside
power
of
is
it?
broken into multiple numbers, right? So you
Yeah.
have
Right.
voltage and you have amperage, and the two of them together determine how much actual total power
Mm-hmm.
is going, right? So I believe you can, like, if you're comparing electricity to like water flowing through tubes, then like the voltage is like how much water pressure is
Yeah.
pushing through that thing.
pressure.
And then you have the current or the amperage, which is like the size of the tube. So how much flow can happen, right? So,
Yeah, it's flow rate and pressure.
right. So if you have a really, really high pressure flow rate, right? So you have really high voltage. You can have really high voltage at really low power levels, so that even something that's super high voltage, if it's low enough power, like it's still safe for you to touch. It depends on like how much power, how much amperage goes along with that voltage, that if you touch it, like it's
Gives you the big shock
super
or not.
dangerous.
Yeah.
But
you
voltage,
have,
like
like,
the higher the
120 as a
voltage, the more it
standard.
can penetrate things. So like if you have a super low volt, that's why like a 12 volt battery, you can like lick it, or you can like touch both ends of a 12 volt battery to your skin and you won't get shocked, is because it's not enough voltage to penetrate you.
yeah, okay.
But if you go to really high voltage, then it will.
Yeah, you
But it's
touch a
that
dryer
combination of
outlet.
voltage and amperage that determines like what sort of damage it can do.
Okay.
Yeah.
So lightning bolts, I think, are up in like the millions of volts.
1.21 gigawatts.
Exactly. Cool. All right. So he even wrote an article. I need to find this. I don't know.
How I control
Popular Science,
gravitation.
August 1929. He has an article, How
That's
I
T.
Control
Townsend Brown?
Gravitation by Townsend Brown. Yeah.
What year was that?
That is
1929.
1929. So he called the coupling effect, the thing that connects electricity and gravity, he calls it electrogravitics. Which is a term I've heard flying around. And he called the actual invention device itself a gravitator.
It's a great name.
But then he joined the Army. And as part of the Army, he worked in the
Marine expedition.
He worked on naval propulsion systems that looked rather suspiciously like a gravitator setup. It looked suspiciously like this as far as how they worked. What's the Naval Research Lab, NRL? He got recruited into the Naval Research Lab, and that was kind of the beginning of his governmental work. And then he said that he got invited onto this Marine expedition called on the MV Caroline, which was the second largest private yacht in America. And he says it was there that he was recruited to work on like
black budget stuff,
the black stuff. And even into intelligence services itself. So they said part of his career was like doing technology, and part of his career was doing intelligence to cover up the technology they were coming up with.
I mean, you're smart enough to come up with the technology. You can definitely hide it.
Right.
You're smart enough to hide it, be able to hide it in plain sight.
Yeah, so you got recruited into this intelligence cartel called the Caroline Group.
Is it an intelligence cartel?
Yeah. Then, yeah, so he kind of just goes through his... So, yeah, he eventually like abruptly quits the Navy. He moves to Burbank, California, where he ends up working for Lockheed in a division called Vega, which ends up ultimately becoming Lockheed Skunk Works,
which is the ultra secret,
the ultra secret
cutting edge
research
stuff.
Division at Lockheed, which is where a lot of the rumors that some of the UFO tech ended up at.
It's coming out of too. Yeah.
And everything goes dark on him for a while then once he goes there.
In the
until
50s.
About the 50s when he shows back up and he's experimenting with flying saucers.
Yeah. And this is what Eric Weinstein was talking about.
Right. And it was this time that like the entire world started getting on the craze of like anti-gravity. And this is when everyone thought we were going to have flying cars and
This is when
the Jetsons and exactly.
Flying cars,
Like this is when all of that stuff started coming out. But then like what Aaron Weinstein talks about around the 60s and 70s is when a lot of these scientists were going forward were pulled out of public sectors and brought into private sectors.
What you're talking about starts here at the 1957 Chapel Hill Conference on the role of gravitation in physics. And he says that this was a pivotal event where they talked about the future of gravitational research. And this is the place where the beginnings of string theory came out. And Eric Weinstein talks about string theory as if it is
the new dead end.
It's specifically like
designed.
A proposed unification theory for physics that is like, he thinks it was like pushed out as like a known dead end to like keep physicists busy in the public sphere while all the real research was being done in private.
Bold claim.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I mean, we're talking about the 60s, right? We're talking about the late 50s, early 60s, where they controlled all of the media. They controlled all of the public's knowledge of what's going on in these institutions.
Channels, you know, on TV.
So yes, nowadays that's hard to believe. Because it's hard to believe that could happen. But in the 50s and 60s, that's not so hard to believe. It's a different
world. We're in the Cold War with the Russians. And
everything is secret. Right. Everything the government does is secret at that point because they don't want anybody who's a secret Russian spy in the United States.
Well, they also now have experience.
Aware of what's going on.
They also now have experience in conducting covert programs because they just had the Manhattan Project that gave us the atomic bomb, and then later gave us the hydrogen bomb.
Yeah, the whole Operation Paperclip was only 10 years before this, 12 years before this, where they got all of the German scientists that are working on classified, which led to the atomic bomb, which led to all these technologies. So
here's some of the people that were at the Gravity Conference. Chapel Hill Conference on the Role of Gravitation in Physics. Freeman Dyson, Bryce and Cecile DeWitt. Richard Feynman was even there.
Yeah, these are like leading scientists.
Agnew Bonson. So Agnew Bonson invited Townsend Brown to experiment at his private lab. He met him there at that event, and he's like, yo, I got this private lab. Come work here.
Come check out what I'm doing.
This is when he goes back and starts talking about the Emmett Brown stuff and
I want to hear about
the TT Brown. I pretty much covered what he covered.
So
but
he says just talking about Emmett
it's
being
this time. It's right at this time in the 50s where, you know, we had this like super condensed history of like within like 100 years, like he said, like 300 years, all the way up to the 50s, we started making these crazy physics discoveries after discoveries after discoveries, and we get Einstein and we get quantum physics and we get all of these. We now know the 4 fundamental forces of the universe with the strong and the weak nuclear forces and electromagnetism and gravity, and we harness 3 of those. The only one we don't harness is gravity. And then in the 50s, all of that like fundamental work that like they basically like there was no new groundbreaking fundamental work really after that point, because it was at that point that the new job became how do we unify quantum physics with classical physics or Einsteinian
bring
physics.
it all together.
And in order to do that, they started chasing down this string theory lead, which still to this day has not been confirmed experimentally. So ever since the 60s, tons and tons of people's careers and tons of the money towards physics research has gone towards trying to see if string theory is real. And we've been coming up empty-handed ever since.
Yeah, we're talking about 60-something years of scientists trying to prove or get any kind of advancement in string theory.
And
this is what
I've
Eric
heard
Weinstein talks
a lot
about.
of scientists.
It's like a dead end for scientists, and no progress is being had because everybody wants to go. Because like even what we were talking about before, it's the cutting edge. Everybody wants, like a lot of these like super brilliant people are going into this field because they want to be the one that makes the breakthrough. Because that's where the money is taking them.
Right.
So you get these super brilliant people who are just held up, who are in the public sphere, who are being held up by this theory that might be complete BS, or at least not lead to anything.
So he's just saying it was epic breakthrough after epic breakthrough, and then nothing after that. Not nothing. Like we still obviously have learned a ton since the 60s.
Yeah, I mean we got the colliders and we got some
a lot
new
of
things.
A lot of it is in quantum physics. Like we've continued fleshing out quantum physics. We've continued fleshing out classical physics,
but it doesn't give us any kind of.
We still don't have that connection between them, and we still don't have technology that allows us to harness gravity, even though we have technology that allows us to harness the 4 other fundamental forces.
Yeah, we got electrogravitics completely dialed in now.
Well, Lockheed probably does. So this is where he introduces the core of his theory, Paul Schatzkin. So the core of his theory is, he calls it the missing fourths. Okay. He calls it his grand nebulous theory or ununified field. So here's the 4 fundamental forces. You got electrogravitics or electromagnetism, right? So that's magnetism and electricity, right? That's one of the fundamental forces of nature. Then you have the weak nuclear force, and you have the strong nuclear force. The strong nuclear force, I don't know if you ever thought about this, but you know how like an atom, is supposed to have protons and neutrons on the inside and a sort of like probability cloud of electrons on the outside. Okay. What do you know about magnets? If you take a positive and you try and put them together, what happens?
They repel.
They repel. So have you ever thought about the fact that you got multiple protons in the center of an atom stuck together?
Preventing the...
But they're protons, as they're positively charged. How are they stuck together? Shouldn't they be repelling each other? And there's a force that keeps them together, and that's called the strong nuclear force.
Okay.
The weak nuclear force has to do with how electrons and light interacts. So that has to do with how, like, if an electron changes its electron orbital, goes down energy, it will emit a photon, and if it gets hit with a photon, it will absorb the energy and go up an orbital.
It's changing states based on the
so
properties.
And then gravitation. So these are the four fundamental forces of nature. And then he talks about how we've been able to manipulate and use three of these forces, right? So with electromagnetism, it's pretty much all of our tech that we know about, like everything electrical, everything that has magnets, everything that's radio signals, that's all electromagnetism. So like we have a pretty like high level of mastery over electromagnetism. Not that we know everything, but like we know how to manipulate it.
Yeah.
With
at
the
least
weak
for our gains that we know of.
With the weak nuclear force, we do have technology that uses it in medical imaging, a lot of medical imaging and like super
X-ray.
precise imaging technology uses the weak nuclear force. The strong nuclear force is used in nuclear power and in obviously like nuclear explosions, nuclear bombs.
Yeah.
But gravitation, we have no technology to manipulate gravity, which is a little suspicious when it's one of the main fundamental forces and we've known about it for a long time. We have a ton of research on it.
Because of how useful it will be.
Yeah.
It's my thought.
So then he talks about this other four things, which is the four types of nuclear reactions. Okay. So you've got fission and fusion. So fission is taking a heavy element that has lots of protons and neutrons and splitting it apart into smaller elements. That's how the atomic bomb was created, using uranium-235.
To destabilize
you purify it and you force it together into a critical mass to where the radiation causes it all to become unstable until the atoms start splitting, which causes more splitting and more splitting until it blows up in a bomb, right? But before we came up with the bomb, we did come up with fission reactors. So we came up with like nuclear power technology even before we created the atom bomb.
So we were able to harness it.
Yeah,
he says we just released it.
The first use of fission reaction was in the Fermi pile, 1942. The first fission bomb was Trinity, 1947. Then we came up with the fusion bomb, and the fusion bomb is the hydrogen bomb. That's where you take small elements and you ram them together to create a new element, and that also releases a ton of energy. So the hydrogen bomb works by fusing hydrogen together. And we did that with Ivy Mike in 1952 with the first hydrogen bomb. A lot bigger.
A lot more powerful.
Right. Fusion creates a lot more energy than fission does, or releases a lot more energy.
I was going to say externally, yeah.
But the one thing in this set of four that we haven't done is sustained fusion reactions. We still, to this day, still hear people talking about, oh, we might crack fission in the next 30, or fusion in the next 30 years. Everyone's talking about, when are we going to get fusion? When are we going to get fusion? Cold fusion and this fusion. But it's never...
This is all like theoretical. Like these are all things that have been played out. It's just, there's no technology
Right.
to speak of.
Fusion reactions
uses
is
it.
essentially how the sun works.
Yeah.
Right. It's like you get this
Contained fusion
you get this
reaction,
hydrogen
that's self-sustaining.
that's joining together to create heavier elements. So essentially, what they're trying to do is come up with a way to like
Create a sun.
create a star in a bottle.
Yeah.
So how do you bottle a star, Dean?
That's a good question. I don't have the
Well,
answer to that.
these are the things that they're doing with the Large Hadron Collider. They're trying to figure out a lot of these type of questions.
Yeah.
A lot of different institutes and places are going to Large Hadron Colliders to use to figure out the types of questions that they're looking at.
Right.
But the promise of fusion is that it would be relatively clean and pretty safe and super, super abundant because it's way more powerful than fission.
And they're building a larger collider now, aren't they? They're building one that like goes under like almost all of the Western Europe
I
like,
think they're
coastal area.
proposing one. I don't know if it got
I don't know if they're
approved.
going forward with it yet, but I know they proposed one. Yeah, I heard that it was going through, but
Yeah.
maybe that was just clickbait.
So he proposes this question: without how do you bottle a star without extinguishing the star or destroying the bottle? And this ties back into the conversation that he teased at the beginning of the talk that he had in 1973. So at this point, he reveals that the person he talked to was actually a family friend of his and was a friend of the Farnsworths. And he knew Philo Farnsworth III.
Damn.
So his son or son, I don't know, or son or grandson. Anyway, the information he got from there was a story, and the story essentially went like this, is that there was a man in a basement working on a device, and his son was there with him, and his son would watch him, and he essentially created a fusion device and kept working on it until he was satisfied with the results, and that once he came up with the results he was looking for, once he had all the measurements done, once it was confirmed that it works, the next thing he did was take the entire thing apart and remove a very critical component and hide it so no one would ever find it. And that's the story he was told back in 1973.
Did they tell you what that part was?
Farnsworth. So yeah, he goes on because he eventually got to meet Farnsworth III. So he's got some pictures of Farnsworth with his
Device there.
his fusion device. And this was the Farnsworth Fuser Mark III from 1965. According to Farnsworth III, he claimed that he got this thing to work. It was creating trillions. This is an actual cathode from Farnsworth Fuser. He said he was actually able to create trillions of fusion reactions per second in this thing, but that it wasn't quite at unity or power yet.
Sustainable.
Like, it wasn't quite sustainable. Like, he was still putting in more power than he was drawing out.
Yeah. It wasn't contained. He had
Which
to
is always the
continually
problem with
create them.
fusion, that when people try and
They
create
die
it.
out. It dies out.
Well, people have made fusion work.
Yeah,
Like,
it's worked.
we can do fusion now.
It's just
the problem
sustainable.
is you end up putting more
Capturing
power
it.
in to create the fusion reaction than you can draw from the fusion reactant. So it's not useful.
So like the idea is to get to a point where it is to a point of self-sustainability where it'll start to even grow on its own. So you're really you're creating and containing a star that will basically never go out, and you're harnessing that energy. Like if you think of like the Sam Raimi Spider-Man verse with Tobey Maguire, where the fusion technology in the palm of our hand, or the power of the sun in the palm of my hand, Dr. Otto Octavius. It's like that was what he did. It was like a self-sustained fusion reaction. And it, this is all science fiction because nobody's ever done it. But once you get to that point, it's a contained field of fusion that you can draw energy from, and But basically, you're creating a sun. We don't really know the ramifications of creating a sun.
Yeah.
Unless we know how to contain it first.
So here is a picture of the actual fuser patent. So he actually got to meet Farnsworth III, and when he met him, he told him that, well, the story is not exactly true. What actually happened is what it was that he submitted this patent, but he left out the key details from the patent. And so
he wanted to get it patented without anybody being able to have access to the key components that make it work.
Correct. So essentially, that's the version of the story that's actually true.
So that's why everybody who looks at it, they're like, this would never work.
Yeah. But apparently he died 3 years after the patent was issued in 1964. So
whatever.
Paul Schatzkin asks the question, did he break the patent or did the patent break him, since he died so close to after the patent? Like, did this, him trying to figure out fusion, is that what, like, you know, ultimately led him down the road?
Or because he has a patent, did it kill him because somebody didn't want him to have that technology out?
Yeah. So he questions, is this the Mr. Fusion from
Back to the Future?
Back to the Future.
Perfect time to take a break. We're
actually over. Yeah.
We're way over.
We're only 15 minutes away from the end of the show. Do you want to just push through, or
sure,
do you need a break?
I mean, if you got more, let's keep going.
Yeah, let me finish this presentation, then we'll see where we're at. Maybe we'll call it after that. Anyway, so then he talks about this recent get-together just a few years ago in 2020 in LA called the Waterstar Summit, where a group of scientists who are studying fusion came to... And apparently they got together at one of Farnsworth's, one of Farnsworth's actual properties or something, like his actual house or lab or something, because they had access to his actual prototypes. They actually, like, here's one of the cores. It
looks like Tony Stark's basement.
It does, right? Anyway, but these guys were interested in Farnsworth version of fusion rather than like the big donut versions. I don't know if you've seen the photos of other fusion reactors. They're usually a big donut.
It's like a torus.
With like a bunch of plasma in the middle that's contained with a magnetic field.
Yeah.
Anyway, they also were able to discover this journal of Farnsworth's, which says just called Notes, highly confidential.
They call it the last.
But in the journal, 6 or 7 pages had been torn out, and only 1 page was left that had writing on it. Which he pointed out that, like, having pages torn out of a science journal is highly weird.
Yeah.
So this is the actual entry in the journal. It says 1970. The last ideas he considered too confidential to leave record of. He felt the world of humanity was not ready for this last gift and maybe not worthy of it.
So he ripped them out himself.
So this is when he brings it back to the Back to the Future thing.
So.
And he talks about Mr. Fusion being the fusion reactor, and he talks about the idea of that flux capacitor maybe being the Townsend Brown's work.
At least a little snippet of it. It kind of looked like it. At least the coils.
Yeah. And he also gives a interesting reason why these people may not have wanted the work public, is because according to general relativity, space-time, we used to think space was a thing and time was a thing, but from general relativity, we realize it's a field of the same thing, and that gravity or mass causes the fabric of space-time to bend,
to warp,
right? And
to see or to experience space-time is the manifestation of matter. Or at least mass, right?
Well,
otherwise it would be a flat plane.
What
if there was no
getting
mass.
at here. Yeah, that's true. So what he's getting at here is the idea that if the Brown effect if that machine can create an artificial gravitational field, then that means it's bending the curvature of space-time, which would mean it's not just affecting space, it's not just affecting gravity, it would also be affecting time. And that makes it extremely dangerous.
Yeah, in that pocket, right? So imagine somebody, if they built a large enough scale, you could reset the entirety of, like, if you had a time travel machine that could reset the clock for whatever set of mass you have. Imagine harnessing the power of a sun or multiple suns, like if you have a Dyson sphere, right? Other civilizations, totally hypothetical, but imagine like having that technology where you can harness all this energy, and then you can turn back the clock on an entire mass like a planet.
Right. And that's what he's saying, is that by having a device that distorts gravity, you also, by definition, have to have a device that distorts time.
Right.
And that is a dangerous thing.
For sure.
Especially if
you know that we live in a simulation.
Yeah.
And it might break the code and we might end up going back to the home screen.
So he starts to close out the talk with some interesting quotes from Townsend Brown. So here's one. He said, "Someday men will travel in space just as easily as we are sailing now." He said this to his wife as he was courting her, taking her on a sailing trip.
Yeah, I love that. I love that quote.
Every time I think about sailing, I think of Dad's sailing story.
Oh man.
Do not share that publicly.
I can't. Yeah. Sorry, people. It's
Maybe
hilarious.
you have Dad on one.
We're definitely going to have Dad on at one point.
I'll have to ask him permission. It's such a
for
great
the story, but I think we should have Dad here. And he's such a great storyteller.
He's talked about wanting to come in.
And he should definitely come.
Yeah.
He should definitely come. We're
That'll be
going to get the
great.
third mic so that this is more official.
Yeah.
So when we have people who drop in, we need to be able to have somewhere for them to talk.
And then the listeners can experience firsthand his interpretation of beer.
100%.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
Yes.
He's got a way of thinking. That
Every
you
time he
need to
talks
be in
about
tune
beer,
with.
he's like, he'll take a drink, and then before he decides whether he likes it or not, he'll ask you,
What percentage is this? What percentage is this?
"Oh,
He
I
doesn't order
think it's
beer.
like 5%," and then he'd be like,
Not enough.
"It's all right."
Yeah.
Yes.
His taste palette changes. His palate changes based on the percentage.
Yes. The beer tastes better if it's stronger.
Yeah. We've talked about this before, but John's here now to confirm.
It is 100% true, people.
Here's another one of Townsend Brown's quote. "Great ships will silently push away from Earth just as easily as the sailboat pushed away from the dock."
Yeah. Oh, man.
That's anti-gravitics.
100%.
So this dude hid some stuff, basically.
The people he's researching, the people that he's like investigating, definitely
Townsend
went underground.
Brown was involved in covert research, whereas the other guy, his name keeps escaping me.
I don't know. Scroll up, you'll find it.
There it is.
Yeah.
Philo Farnsworth.
Farnsworth.
It's such a weird name. You would think because it's so weird, I should be able to remember it, but it's so weird for some reason I can't remember it.
I was going to say
that dude-
Farnsworth.
He hid something that did not show up in the patent.
Right.
Right.
And he ripped pages out of his research notes.
So that people could not discover what he was thinking about in whatever time frame.
And then it's that same guy making these quotes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So here's so that was Townsend. Townsend was the UFO
Okay.
propulsion guy, and then
Yeah.
Farnsworth was the
researcher.
was the nuclear reactor guy.
Got it. Okay.
So Townsend said those quotes I just read. Now this part I'm about to talk about is Farnsworth. Okay, so Farnsworth.
Paul Schatzkin's the one who's given the presentation. So
Yeah.
he's another name we've thrown around.
So Farnsworth has been heard commenting about chemical rocket technology, and his take is that, I think he has the quote here, He called chemical rockets brute and awkward force. He compared it to a pineapple lifting a pea because the pineapple is the entire structure and all of the fuel that you need in order to lift the structure and the fuel just to get that tiny pea of payload out in orbit.
Yeah.
It's super wasteful and super, he calls it brute and awkward force. I think that's great. But he says that with fusion power, the ratios would be reversed.
So you'd have a small amount of power thrusting a large amount of payload.
Yeah. So back to his theory of the missing fourths. So if you remember the 4 fundamental forces, the missing one that we don't have tech around, gravitation, that's the Townsend Brown part. And then the 4 types of nuclear technology. Nuclear reactions, and the one that we don't have is controlled fusion.
Yeah.
So if you take those 2 missing fourths, one of them is Townsend Brown, one of them is Farnsley, and if you put those together,
Farnsworth.
Dang it, see?
Farnsworth.
At least I got the Farn right. I'm getting closer.
Farnsley. Farn. You're now Farn. Sorry, buddy.
So anyway, those 2 pieces of technology by these 2 inventors, if you put them together, now all of a sudden you have the power that you need to create the millions of volts that you need
for the technology
to create the lift
for these UFOs.
For the UFOs, so
possibly to produce the energy needed to.
And the time frame is just perfect. A first UFO crash was in what, 1946, 1945?
47 was Roswell, but I think there was one even before that.
Yeah, there was one before that, like 46 or something.
I think it was
47 was Roswell, and that was where we found this light aluminum-looking object that crashed down in Roswell, where they had this aluminum structure that could maintain its shape. And
that you could fold up.
You could fold into a ball, but then
you
as soon as you let go, it would go back to its original.
They said it was like aluminum foil.
It's like memory
you could
foam.
Fold it, but then you would let go and it would take its original shape.
It's memory foam
and not have any
metal.
creases in it.
Exactly. And that's like all the same time where imagine that's when you're testing things where things would fall out of the sky and break, and you'd have to go collect those things and create a story to cover it up, especially if it's technology you don't want to get out.
Yeah.
This is 1945 into the 50s, into the 60s.
And then he ends the whole talk with a quote from Farnsworth. I know that God exists. I know that I have never invented anything. I have been a medium by which these things were given to the culture as fast as the culture could earn them.
Yeah. So as long as you could receive the information is when you are allowed to have the information you need.
And we've talked about this before on the show. There's multiple scientists who have reported the experience that their discoveries were actually inspirations.
From
famously Watson and Crick. I combined their names. Watson and Crick, who won a Nobel Prize for discovering the shape of DNA. Mm-hmm. They found out, they say they got that idea from an LSD trip,
which led to science improving, And then the idea that we are all made of God, like these super ancient ideas of spirituality is knowing that we are all made of the same material that makes all of everything else. Sorry for that. But it's such an enigmatic thing. You just are, every time you go into modern technology and all these discoveries, it brings you back to historical stuff and all of the stuff that they knew. And then it just cuts off at some point. There's a point where you can no longer get to any more knowledge in history, and in the future eventually we'll get to some sort of knowledge, but we're just in this point where things have been lost and we're trying to rediscover things. And
the other thing I thought was really cool about this talk is that he kept shouting out the Jesse Michaels YouTube channel. Because Jesse Michaels did videos about Townsend Brown and about this topic.
That's where I first heard of Townsend Brown.
Right. And so what this guy, God dang it, I can't remember his name either. Paul Schatzkin is talking about is Jesse Michaels videos were actually inspired by his books, but then he went further and was able to take those videos and make really nice
he did a good job
visuals to it. So he actually played a bunch of Jesse's
Michaels
clips
is good.
in the talk.
Have you watched any of Jesse Michaels stuff? Oh, dude.
Jesse Michaels YouTube is the shit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a lot of...
I'll send you a link.
It's a lot of great stuff in there. Dude.
Lots of UFO stuff.
Jesse Michaels,
his Eric Weinstein and
Eric
How
Weinstein
Put Off
stuff.
video where the two of them are
and then you got Kurt J. Mungle who does How Put Off and Eric Weinstein together too. He
did them together too?
Yeah, he moderates a talk. I think it was like multiple videos. Actually, I don't know if it's them together, but I know he like puts them together.
He's talked to them both. Yeah.
He's talked to them both and then like puts their ideas into one single video where he interviews them both.
Speaking of which, did you guys check out the new Joe Rogan episode where he had Eric Weinstein on with Terrence Howard?
I watched the whole thing, yeah.
That was pretty interesting.
Yeah. Eric Weinstein is probably one of my favorite scientists at this point.
He's humble.
He's humble.
He
wants to get to the nature of things, and he admits that Terrence Howard has a mind for these things, but he doesn't have the formal education to really get his ideas out.
Right. Yeah. He hasn't done the work for it.
And so what I love about Eric is that he's able to put that aside and be like, listen, you have great ideas, but you need a fundamental understanding of what you're talking about to be in the league of giving talks or teaching on these things.
Right.
Like, don't assume you know things because you self-taught, right?
Right.
Like, just take your great ideas and your understanding of how things work and in your perspective, but then go learn more from the experts.
You know what I found super funny about that episode is he poo-pooed the 1 times 1 equals 2, which thank God.
But he'd simplify it the way you did.
Yeah.
Which is way easier to simplify it and to like get to the root of it.
All right. But the biggest thing that Terrence's work that he appreciated was one of the things I thought was stupid was like, oh, cool, it's a drone.
Oh, the models or the drone things.
No, the linchpin thing that he created. Yeah.
Well, I mean, but the thing is that Eric was very smart about the way he gave him credit for that. He's like, listen, I'm not an expert on the way that those might operate, but it's a great idea, and I think that people should investigate that.
Yeah.
And his other critique was that Terrence is basically just laying up a softball for anybody in the scientific community to take his research or the things that he talks about and actually put validity behind it and put their name on it. He keeps telling him over and over again in that listen, all you're doing is giving people an opportunity to take what you're saying and actually make scientific claims behind them that are valid, that people are going to respond to. Because he doesn't use the right language, he doesn't present them in the right way, and he doesn't have the background to be able to be taken seriously.
I think I heard it from a little bit of a different angle. Like, I heard what he was saying as the way you're talking, any scientist or mathematician is going to hear you talk and hear you say something that's so fundamentally wrong or offensive to them, and they will just stop listening to you.
Well, that is what he's saying. But the fundamentals of what he's talking about.
Well, because Terrence was all obsessed on the like patent thing.
Yeah.
And Eric was validating that by saying, yes, it does happen quite often that someone can like take your research and then tweak a bit of it and then publish it as their own.
That's what I'm saying.
But I don't think he was saying that Terrence was in danger of that happening to him exactly.
Well, he was definitely saying that about the linchpin stuff and the things that he was trying to teach because he had the most command of the knowledge of those things. Those are the things he was trying to like preach.
Right.
And so because of that, he doesn't have the formalities of like understanding the mathematics and like all of the different things that like go into like making something usable out of it. Because yes, you have the patents for the ideas that could make up something, but that doesn't mean that somebody couldn't come in and actually make something by adding more of real science to it and being like, I came up with it, even though he had the fundamental idea. I came up with this product.
Right.
You know, that's what I got from that. But
yeah, no,
it definitely doesn't say that everything he's saying is that way, where everything he says is patentable and everybody's going to steal every idea he ever had.
Well,
but
he did do the one thing that I thought was super important, which is like, listen, dude, a patent just means that some clerk
didn't understand what you were saying.
Issued a patent.
Right.
It doesn't mean that what you invented is useful. It doesn't mean that what you invented works. And all of that is true.
All they have to make sure is that you're not infringing on anybody else's patents.
Right. And so, like, having patents isn't proof of your scientific knowledge per se.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Anyway, we are over already. So
went from under to over.
Thanks for joining us, John. I'm glad you were here.
Yeah, it was fun listening to you guys talk and be involved in some way. Ask all the dumb questions. It was fun.
We're going to have you back. We're going to have a third mic, so we don't have to pass the mic around.
Once we get the third mic, I think it would be really cool to have you around.
And
it sounds like you're going to have members. Thursdays free.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Well, Fridays you'll be going to work, though, so...
Fridays will be... No.
So Thursdays...
he'll be off Fridays.
Oh, Fridays, yeah.
So if you're off Fridays, it's Thursday nights we record, so...
I mean, that's true.
Not that you have to come every night, but like...
Yeah.
Look, you guys have plenty of people who are interested in being involved.
Yeah.
I hope so. Sure. Yeah.
It would be fun to have you around more.
Yeah, I agree.
That's what I'm saying.
I agree.
Cool. So, we ended up only talking about one of these talks. I got another one. I listened to the Johanna James talk, so we'll keep that for next week.
It was perfect. We'll continue on these because, yes, we talk about the Cosmic Summit, but it really just leads into more discussion from us.
Mm-hmm.
And keep all the comments coming. We want to hear from y'all. Email us at host@dualitycheck.net, YouTube, Rumble, Instagram, Facebook. We'll check all those messages if you want to DM us or comment or whatever.
Yeah. And if you want to check out the images, either watch the YouTube video or the Rumble video, or go to listen to the podcast on Overcast. That will show the slideshows. I think the Apple Podcast apps supports pictures as well.
Okay.
I also found out, because we had talked about this, you can, in fact, leave reviews. And, in fact, we do have a review.
Oh, really?
So I'd like to read that.
Yeah. Cue it up.
If you can take care of this dead air while I search it.
I will try. John.
Keep going, Jordan. Dean, where you at with the search? We're getting...
I'm already out of breath.
Are you there yet? Okay, he's ready.
All right, so if you want to leave us a review, you can go to Apple Podcasts, you search Duality Check. If you click on the show, and then you scroll down below the episodes.
Okay.
So you're on the show.
I got way down.
You scroll down below the episodes, it will show you reviews.
How many we got there?
That's where you can leave us a review. So we have a single 5-star review so far. So I want to shout out JNAR32. Said, I've been looking for a podcast to listen to and found Duality Check. Every episode I've learned a ton about something I didn't know anything about before. It's both entertaining and educational. The two hosts, Dean and Drew, have some great banter and have me cracking up often. I would highly recommend you check out Duality Check. So thank you, JNAR32, for that review.
Hell yeah.
And now that we know how that works,
please come in.
Please, if you're listening, even if you're not listening on Apple Podcasts, if you have an iPhone, go to Apple Podcasts, search for our podcast, leave us a review, give us a high score, help us get discovered by other people. It'd be super awesome of you. So
Jnar, you're a legend.
Yeah.
All right,
Alrighty, y'all. We will be
out.
back with you next week.
See you later.